It's time for the Stronger podcast again. And uh, surprise, surprise, I'm the guy who's starting it off this week. I'm Phil Merton, chaplain with Institutional Ministries, and here with my wondrous colleagues, Ruth and Mark. And I have no way of bringing up their pictures. I'm hoping Ruth does. Can you push some buttons there, Ruth, and make yourselves magically appear? Oh, well, we're almost there. Here's Mark. Here's Ruth.
Hi.
Oh,
Bright
man.
smiling faces.
I would not feel so all alone. I'm not going to go on with that as much as I'd like to. Nor will I do what I threatened to do last week when I knew this is All Saints Day. I'm just going to sing portions of Sympathy for the Devil, but I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to.
It's probably a good move.
Okay. Even though I love the quote, every cop is a criminal and all the sinners saints. There, I did it anyway.
Very good. His favorite portion of the song.
Okay.
We should have pulled up the karaoke one that he did one time.
I did.
Played that, but
So homework assignment, Mark.
yeah.
Find that so we can play it.
Well, last week, as you remember, in our previous episode, our intrepid explorers were looking at the territory of harm reduction, which I'm just fascinated by this topic. I'm fascinated. I'm challenged. I'm a little scared. I'm a little intrigued. And it sounds so innocuous. Harm reduction. What could be wrong with that? But as Mark laid it out for us, we're talking here about looking at people who are involved in harmful behavior and finding ways to help ease them out of that, get them away from the behaviors that are causing harm and into something that, something a whole lot closer to what God has in mind for them. So that involves some tough choices. You'd want to do it all or nothing. Like if a person is using psychoactive drugs, then you want them just stop. And well, what if they can't? Well, then can't do anything with you until you just stop. Well, what can you do in the meanwhile while they're just not ready to stop? Can we help them? And especially, can we help reduce harm? Mark, you said that this is about enabling people to keep breathing.
Well, that was one of the phrases used with the Narcan drug to reverse the opioid overdose, and it was to enable them to breathe. Okay. And
there it's literally.
Literally to enable them to breathe. But I like that concept of applying it to the whole thing. Enabling them to breathe, to live, to have time for recovery, have time for that
time. Yeah, to create a space where people can recover, where people can reassess their lives, where people can start to see there's you're loved, you're valuable. There's hope, but the space has to be created, which you can't. It's not there if they're dying.
Right.
So, in the course of that discussion, I'm just yakking away. I'm a preacher, so I preach. Ruth, I got to talk a little bit more about this afterwards. I know I've talked with several other people since that time, and found some vehement objections from some people about some aspects of the harm reduction. At least some stuff has been done for harm reduction. And I get it. There's going to be a lot of questioning stuff. So I say, good, let the conversation begin. Throw it to you, Ruth. You were thinking of a few possible objections.
Yes. Conversation is definitely a good thing. But one of the things that you and I were talking about last time, even after the show, was the fact that there will be some people who, when they think about the supporting arguments for harm reduction techniques, will take it to say, okay, if that follows through for this over here, then that could also be the same thing for something like abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really the argument would seem to follow through, at least on the surface. But another thing that that we were talking about in that conversation is that it's not just the life of one person that's affected by a decision like that. It's also the life of the child that's also threatened in that sort of a situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll kind of put that back to you and let you share kind of where your thoughts were with that.
Yeah.
And also, I'm interested in hearing from you, Mark, especially since this is a field that you're pretty much in for. Um, I'd like to hear if you've heard any kind of counters to that, or if kind of where you are kind of in your headspace with that. So
I can tell you, as that thought definitely occurred to me as we were having the podcast. What about saying, well, by regulating abortion, by making sure it's happening in regulated facilities, medical facilities, then that reduces harm. The woman is less likely to die of infection and botched abortions and all of that. So isn't that an example? You could make that argument. I don't, because I'm thinking, well, in an abortion, somebody gets killed. The argument would be, well, if you regulate and make it sanitary and medically supervised, then, well, you reduce the chances of two people getting killed in the course of an abortion. That's not good enough. To reduce it to where just one person is guaranteed to be killed in this this operation. I don't know. That's not good enough. You want to reduce harm to not getting people killed. I just don't think that's a. I don't think this is a good example of harm reduction. I can see where this would pop up, though. I don't know. That's my thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of interrupt, and I'm sorry, Mark, because I know that I said that I also wanted to hear your thoughts here, and I do. But kind of something that comes into my head, Phil, even as you're addressing the concern there, is another thing that we ended up talking about last time was the allowances that God made for things that that He wanted to bring people away from.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, and I could be wrong about this because I could not be thinking about things in entirety, but I'm not seeing in my mind right now an allowance that God made that could have potentially led to murder.
Well, I think it's a good point. Yeah, I mentioned God allowing for divorce, God allowing for polygamy. Worked with people in a lot of different things where they were at, but in the killing of children, that was something that was always outlawed.
Okay, now we'll give it back to you, Mark.
Okay. So first of all, I had not thought of abortion in this realm of harm reduction at all. That's
okay.
In that sense of that these ideas would be applied there. I think there's definitely conversation in various ways about where you might use that terminology harm reduction, that you don't use it. I'm trying to think of just in the medical situation of what's the least harm we're going to do here.
Okay.
We would love to save both lives, but we can't. So there's that. That's that thought process.
Sure.
On the other side, where I guess if I were to think in terms of harm reduction with abortion, I think I would think in terms of looking at what are the things that lead to people choosing or thinking about having abortion.
Sure.
What are some of the things that need to be addressed on the front end?
Yeah.
In justice issues and economic issues and health issues that would hopefully would reduce the number of people thinking that. But that's not I guess so I think that the concept of harm reduction probably can be applied to lots of different areas in life. And
Sure.
we just have, like you said in the beginning, having the conversation about what, what's going to work here, what's not, it's not absolute. This is absolutely the way it has to be. And I think we get that way so often in any conversation we have. Somebody proposes something and suddenly it's either all of that or none of it, instead of let's have the conversation.
Exactly.
And talk about what works. I mean, just on Sunday at church, we were talking about a homeless population that's hanging around the church. And I thought it was one person. And so I'm thinking of dealing with one person. And then I find out, no, it's three people and they're doing this. And that changes the whole conversation. But we had the conversation. And that really, because we each had our insights and we could talk about, not just hard and fast rules, but okay, how are we going to deal with these people at this point in time? And it was a very positive experience.
Oh, good. I'm glad you felt that way. I was feeling that way, and you did too.
And
go ahead.
And that's not always what happens in conversations about, justice issues or how we handle a situation. Right. It's so often it seems like it's either one way or the other way, and there's no in between. And I think there's room for a lot of in between, and even in and a lot of it too is just trying to understand. And that's what I said so much yesterday in church was thinking of as a lot of individual situations. I'm always thinking of how I deal with an individual, not public policy for a whole bunch of people necessarily.
Okay, that's good. Yes.
Yeah, and sometimes policy will come, but you've got to have that wiggle room to say, okay, how are we going to help this person?
Good. Yeah.
And not just say, okay. And that's kind of the idea of recovery. One size doesn't fit all.
Okay.
And the opposite of that, I'd say drug use, One size doesn't fit all. There's all sorts of different manners of use and abuse and disorder and, things that go with it. And so how do I deal with this person where they're at?
Exactly.
So that's my speech right
now. I hadn't connected those dots, but yeah, that conversation we had in church yesterday about some guys sleeping on the church porch. That's I too, I liked where the conversation went. We discussed this for quite a while after church, Ruth. What we're talking about is we knew one guy had been from time to time sleeping on the porch, and so what? Except that he'd leave his mattress there, he'd leave his stuff there. Okay, the guys at church, God bless them, they were not thinking, well, this is a problem and we solved the problem by getting rid of the guy. They wanted to work with him. They wanted to see how can we meet him where he's at, and explain to him, we got to get your stuff out of the way. I can't leave it there. But if you want to come in, use the bathroom, fine. They wanted to show kindness to him where he was at. So like you said, Mark, then the problem ended up being this one guy attracted two more who are attracted more. It's starting to be a spot where people are convening, and they were getting kind of hostile about anybody challenging them. They were doing some work on the roof. Guy had to get his ladder up there, and they were getting on his case for disturbing their slumbers. So it was getting to be a problem that way. But I love the way that the guys at church who were discussing this were not saying, well, we solved the problem by getting rid of the guys. Sure, that makes things nice and tidy and easy, but that's not how love works. It's not what God has called us to. He's called us to try to reach out and love, and that's always messy.
I'm glad that we've gotten around to this topic of what God calls us to, because in this topic, we're talking about harm reduction. I think we kind of talked about it a little bit last time, but it would probably be a good idea if we could go ahead and focus more on that biblical model and what that looks like as we're talking about harm reduction. And Phil, you had some ideas regarding that too.
Okay. Like, excuse me, when you see a behavior that this can't go on, this has got to go. It's easy to just focus on the behavior and say, well, that's going to be our focus, and until that behavior goes, we're just going to keep hammering, and not looking at the person. I thought of a couple of things. Man, here's where I should have screen share so we can just pop this Bible verse up on the screen. But
you want screen share?
Let's not for right now. The first one is just 2 verses, so big deal. Thinking about how Paul the Apostle approached this when he had a couple of problem situations. Well, the first one, it wasn't a problem so much as he was telling his young colleague Timothy, here's some tips on dealing with people, as he was pastoring a Christian community. He said, 1 Timothy 5, do not rebuke an older man harshly, but encourage him as a father, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters, with all purity. Okay, so that picture he gives there, you see something that's got to go. That behavior can't stay. So instead of saying we're going to take care of this problem right here and now, and approaching it with that kind of harshness, we're going to focus on the behavior. He said, "What if that was your dad? What if that was your mother?" Start reframing the situation that way. One of the things that hit me right away when I just reread this was I thought of a conversation. It was on a forum I was on several years ago, where there's one thread dealing with Christian nonviolence. And there were some guys who are just real hardcore nonviolence. Never, ever take up deadly force against anybody under any circumstance. And other people on this forum were thinking you're going too far with this. And I recall one guy challenged them, the hardcore nonviolent guy. He said, okay, so you come home and you see a stranger assaulting your wife. Her life is in danger. She's and you have access to a gun. You would not pick it up and shoot this guy? Is that what you're saying? And somebody else came back then and said, you're asking the wrong question. The question should be, what if you came home and found your son assaulting your wife and you had access to a gun? What would you do? Now, what's the answer to that? I'm not sure, but you got to reframe it. You got to put it in those terms. I believe that's what Paul is doing here for us. When you look at somebody, you don't see the problem. You don't see a problem. You see a person. You see a person Jesus loves. And here he's saying, look at them as a family member. And what's your goal then? Eliminate the problem? Well, of course not. It's not this. Yes, I want to eliminate the problem, but I love this person. I want this person to I want them to stop doing this, but I want them to be a whole person.
So I feel like this is probably going to take us on a tangent, but I have to ask, are you someone who's advocating for extreme nonviolence, or?
I'm not sure what I think. That's why I was so fascinated with the conversation. I could just sit back and be a spectator. I wasn't rooting for one side or the other. Anyway, I just want to say, so what? How are you going to handle this? But just that response of you're asking the wrong question, that really stuck with me. Easy to look and say, well, there's the problem. That person is not just somebody committing problems, causing a problem. He is the problem. So eliminate the person, eliminate the problem. and it doesn't have to be it's an extreme example the guy gave. It was meant to be provocative, but guy's sleeping on the church porch. What do? Chase him away? Problem solved. Is that the solution? What if that's your father sleeping on the porch?
Mm-hmm.
So harm reduction. Yes, he wanted to get out of this lifestyle, but in the meanwhile, stay warm, stay safe, and let us be part of this.
I love that verse that you pulled out there, Phil. It's one that's like I'm reading. I'm going, how come I never read that like that before? Encourage him as a father, younger men as brothers, older men as mothers, younger women as sisters with all purity. Just and then where you took that, it's like, this is your mother, this is your father, and I think that way. And that's one of the techniques I've used over the years, or what happened to me when I went into jail, and after my own stereotypes of who's in jail, and then the orientation of a facility that says this is what these people are like. What convinced me differently was, as they sat in front of me and talked, and they're talking about all the same things I'm concerned about. They were talking about their kids. They were talking about mom. They were talking about brothers. They are me, because they're a father, they're a brother, they're a son, a grandson, a grandfather, and to once I started looking at them that way, then the whole conversation changes, the whole attitude changes. There's always challenges to that, but I have to keep coming back to that, and keep coming back to, even their, when they're talking about a loved one and how they're talking about them, even, and realizing that they don't necessarily see this. I'm thinking more similar, maybe like the victim, or the other side, where it's like, yeah, this person did this to me, but they're my blood, they're my family. They don't look at it as evil in that, but they did something bad, but they're still family, and they will love them. And
I think even as we're looking at that, though, the responses may vary.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. There's times when I think it came up last week, or last time we got together. There's the idea of enabling, being an enabler. At what point am I perpetuating, encouraging this harmful behavior, and what point am I just helping a person stay alive, and creating the space where they can start to get better? Those are tough calls to make. But if the goal is to have a person, restore the person, restore the relationship, if I'm looking at that person as my father, as my brother, as my child, there sometimes you got to make tough decisions and give them some consequences, but always with the goal of restoration, not with the goal of just, took care of that problem. Another part of something else that Paul the Apostle wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 2. This is kind of starting in mid-thought. The whole letter to the Corinthians, he's playing off of some stuff, previous conversations he'd been having with them, and stuff that they'd been dealing with for a while in the congregation. So here we pick them up in the mid-thought here. This is why I made up my mind that I would not make another sad visit to you. For if I make you sad, then who's there to make me glad, other than those I made sad? I'm writing for this very purpose, that when I arrive, I will not be made sad by those who should make me glad. I'm confident about all of you, that what gives me joy is what gives joy to all of you. In fact, out of so much trouble and anguish of heart, I wrote to you with many tears. My goal was not to make you sad, but that you would know how very much I love you. Now, if anyone has caused sorrow, he hasn't done it to me, but to all of you to some extent, not to overstate it. This punishment inflicted on such a person by the majority is enough, so that instead you should rather forgive and comfort him, or else such a person could be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. For that reason, I urge you, reaffirm your love for him. A couple of things that hit me there. He's talking about how previous communications with the Corinthians, he had some pretty strong words for them. What they were doing was just, this has to stop, you guys. And he stated it very bluntly. But I love how then he says, out of much trouble and anguish of heart, I wrote to you with many tears. It's easy to read the stuff on the page and look at the words of reprimand and think of him as thundering condemnation. And here he's saying, no, I wasn't thundering condemnation. I was crying when I wrote this to you. I hated to have to say this to you. There again, this reframing this whole thing. This isn't condemnation. This breaks my heart. So you got that going. Reframe it that way. What's the spirit this is coming from? And then he gets to talking about this situation where they had to give a guy a consequence. What is he talking about here? He says the punishment inflicted on such a person who caused you all sorrow by the majority is enough. Now forgive him and comfort him. Now, we don't know for sure who that is, what he's talking about. There could be that situation in 1 Corinthians that Paul had to talk to these guys about, where they were just letting it slide when a man was hooking up with his stepmother. It might be that, might be something else. We don't know. But one way or the other, the Corinthian congregation decided, okay, we got to give this guy a consequence. Mm-hmm. And they followed through with it. And it was effective, and that guy was saying, "Oh my goodness, I should never have done this," right? Whatever it was. But Paul is saying, "Look, you can't let your last word to him be, you did wrong. The last word always has to be, you're loved." So he says, reaffirm your forgiveness for them. You don't want them overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. That's that goal. It's always restoration of the person and restoration of the relationship. Never just get rid of the bad behavior.
I'd like for us to talk about that a bit more, but I think first maybe to go to the comments and see. It looks like we have one from Diamond. Hi, Diamond.
Okay. Diamond, yes.
And this is in response. It looks like to the picture of treating people. As family. It says that's a good way for all of us to look at people. That is, unless you have a rocky family history in which mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters weren't the loving ones in your life.
Yeah.
What do you do then?
It's sometimes with guys in prison, they've had terrible relationships with their families. And you look at the stuff in the Bible, it talks about God is your father. It's like, oh gosh, this could be bad. But the flip side of that is most of the guys that I deal with, they are fathers, and they feel horrible about how they let their kids down. They know the kind of father they want to be, and so to start to think in those terms, God is the father that you would like to be to your kids, and then to think about, well, if this bad behavior that has to go, what if that was my son? How would I approach it then? I want to be a good father for that son.
Yeah, but I think there also, even in looking at it that way, if we're looking at something in a reflection that's made up of the pieces of broken glass of a mirror, then even that understanding is not necessarily going to be one that really helps us as we're talking about using that as a model for how we interact with others.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess a follow-up question would be, in a situation like that, what would you say?
And even you're saying, like, I look at myself as, I'm not much of a father, so I'm not sure what to work with. Is that
Well, what I'm saying is, so say you're in a situation, your relationship with your family is
Mhm.
not a good one.
Right?
Your response that you're saying right now is to look at the type of family member that you would like to be to others. Like, for
Okay.
example, if the father you would like to be to your son.
Mhm.
But even in that, because of the fact that what we're constructing based off of is the equivalent pretty much to a broken mirror,
Mhm.
like there's going to be um, some brokenness in that understanding, and even some hurt that could influence the way that we're able to kind of look
Mhm.
at that. So i guess I guess the question would be, um, one, is that still a model that would be helpful, and two, if not, then maybe what might be an alternative model or an alternative way of viewing things, so that we
Mhm.
are moving forward in a way that is helpful.
Okay. And you might have some thoughts on this too, Mark. But first thing that I'd respond to is that this works. People who have had bad relationships, when they have a chance to, with under the guidance of God, recognizing, wow, God loves me. He is my father, the father I wish I was. And then they get an opportunity to show that kind of love to somebody. I've seen it repeatedly. They say, okay, I'm going to give this another try. I'm thinking right now of one situation in jail I ran into earlier this year. There was one young guy in the housing unit that I was working in. He had this super anger management problem. He just anybody could push his button and he would blow up. And and I was you're sitting there bored in jail. What do? You push a button and watch the guy blow up. Uh, he wasn't the smartest guy in the world and couldn't had a hard time seeing this problem coming, and so that was constantly getting harassed just for entertainment purposes. And it was so neat to see the other guys in our little Bible study group. They just kind of stepped in and mentored him. They worked with him just so patiently, instead of pushing his buttons like those guys did. They tried to patiently work with him and say, okay, here's what you're going to have to do when this happens. And he'd fail, and they'd say, okay, let's try again. It was just so neat to see that happen. Uh, so I don't know. It works. What do you look for? If I don't have any good role models in life, well, uh, I don't know. I guess in that case, God stepped in and said, "Well, you're going to be the role model now."
Mm-hmm. I'm going to take this back to when Diamond wrote her comment. It took me a while to figure out, as we were doing all this other talking, where this was coming from. But we were talking about, as we're looking at this person that's in trouble,
Yeah.
and they're a stranger, but can we see them as a family member?
Okay.
And then she's saying, well, what if your family members, you don't have that kind of thought process with your family members?
Mm-hmm.
So how do I look at that person in a positive light? How else can we look at it? So, and my thought there is, one of the places I go to as well um, is to think in terms of the image of God, uh, using the terminology, let's say, like, this person is an image bearer of God, created, you can say created by God, loved by God, redeemed
Mm-hmm.
by the death of Jesus on the cross. They're worth something to God in that respect, have a place in his scheme of things, and therefore stands on an equal standing with me, that as God loves the righteous and the unrighteous, as God loves all people, God so loved the world. Can I look at that person in that way, no matter what they're doing, no matter what they've gotten themselves involved in? Um, I also heard it explained in the sense of, even outside of religious way of looking at it, of just thinking this is a unique individual in this world.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking of a fingerprint, that's your unique identifier, pretty much around it. And so, if you're even talking totally outside the realm of religion, just thinking the universe has placed this person here. They have a place in the universe. How should I treat them?
I just thought about.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I just thought about something using Evil Disney.
Equal.
So, Evil Disney.
Evil Disney.
Couple of years ago, probably more than that. Well, definitely more than that now. When Frozen came out, one of the things that was a highlight about that is the relationship that was there between between the two sisters who are pretty much main characters, and I'm going to kind of try and like bring it back around pretty quick here. The older sister ends up in a situation basically where she's pushing everyone away because she feels like everyone who's around her gets hurt or whatever. What she actually does end up hurting her sister, but ultimately, like the relationship there, and the fact that that her sister had pursued her or whatever was something that ended up being something that had an impact on her. And I'm gonna stop talking about Frozen now, but yeah, that's just what was on my mind.
Okay. Well, and there are times when you find examples, all sorts of places at work, that you think, hey, that's an insight into human behavior that we need to consider here. Yeah. If I could now jump back to what Phil was talking about with that passage from 2 Corinthians, and you talked about restoration. This is all about restoration and restoring the relationship. One of the things that needs to be fully understood in that is that there's no time frame on that.
Okay.
There's no pressure to say you have to get this done now. It's the goal, but depending on the type of things that have gone on and the hurt, this could take years and years and years. And I've watched very interesting show that's a couple of years old now, but it's called The Redemption Project, and it's looking at people who've committed crimes, and usually very murder or shooting somebody, something like that, and that the victim or the victim's family and this person eventually going down different pathways, it seems like, come to this point of saying we need to talk. And we have and you just see all of a sudden these interesting conversations. Sometimes it's just like, tell me what happened, tell me why you did what you did, and when they and just hearing that explanation of what was from their perspective of what they saw and what they were doing is just, it's beautiful to see. But it's taken a couple of I've seen, it's taken 20 years before that happened. And it's not an overnight thing. Usually it's a long process of looking at things and going through things and working. It's working through yourself. It's working on okay, who am I, what have I done, finding healing for the actions that you took or that happened to you. And you have to have that healing before you can actually face the other person and start thinking differently about the other person. And that comes along in steps. And the beautiful thing about it is the phrase that just comes along here. I don't know why it popped in my head right now, but in the whole area that we're talking about, harm reduction or reconciling with people, and it's a phrase that maybe it comes out of the big book, Phil, but I know I got it from you, was like with the concept of making amends. Well, why make amends? Because I can.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I can do that. I can actually not cause harm.
Yeah.
And I can actually bring some healing. What a wonderful opportunity. And people jump at that. And they actually find out it's like, I could actually really help someone after all the harm I did.
Yeah.
And so in their idea of harm reduction, just Why do that? Well, because I can help someone. This is one step, and that harm reduction material I talked about last time. And one of the principles was meeting people where they are, but not leaving them there.
Okay.
The goal is not to just enable
Okay.
continued use at that level that they're at,
Mhm.
where they're causing harm to themselves. No, we want you to move away from that,
Okay.
right? We got to get you
All
away
right.
from that. And that's a huge thing. As I
I
think of,
I thought of a parallel to this idea of it. You meet people where they're at, but you don't leave them where they're at. Um, when my grandson Sam was in first grade, uh, the method they had for getting kids comfortable with spelling and writing, they familiarize them with the letters, what the sounds the letters made, and then they'd just kind of let them try it out, kids. Uh, they I remember seeing a worksheet that there's pictures of objects, and they said just write how you think this particular thing is spelled. Just write it, and there was no grades. It was just we're just getting you comfortable with this. What struck me with this was there's a picture of a tree, and Sam wrote next to that tree CHRE, and I had to stop and think, oh, tree. That's what he was hearing. He wasn't hearing a T. He was hearing a C, a tree, tree.
yeah.
So that's what he wrote, and that was fine. It's like, okay, that you made a good try there. That's good. You're getting comfortable with the letters and with writing, and we'll refine it as we go along. But for the time being, that's fine. CHRE spells tree. Uh, and I'm thinking we're kind of looking at that sort of thing here. You're not used to living life without these destructive habits that you picked up. So, okay, let's work with you where you're at, and eventually you'll learn how to spell tree right. But for the time being, you're getting comfortable interacting with us. Uh, we'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. And one of the other things that we said that we kind of wanted to talk about, I don't know if we said that we wanted to talk about it after the show last time, in regard to not leaving people where they're at, and also in how we view people as looking at the Rahab and her story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's definitely an example of one people literally meeting someone where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
Even someone who had the lifestyle that that Rahab had,
Mm-hmm.
and then also the way that God worked through that, not just in like in Rahab's story, but also in the greater story even of salvation.
Okay. Now, right along those lines, a friend of mine who's pastor at a church here in Milwaukee, his church is right in it's right in Prostitution Central. The area within a few blocks of his church is where women are on the stroll any time of day, any day of the week. And it was getting to be a problem, like what we were having in our church, homeless guys sleeping there. They're on the stroll, school hours. They guys, the pastors and teachers would come to unlock the school in the morning, and there would be a woman sleeping off after a very hard night of doing their work. And obviously, people were upset in the congregation. What are we going to do about this? My friend, the pastor, one point he found a woman just there next to the church, or the school door, and he approached her and he said something to the effect of, "How can we help you? What do you need?" And she said, "I'm hungry." And he said, "Okay, we got a starting place." And for a while, we had a little program we were trying where this is great. Volunteers would, on given days, we'd walk up and down the streets. We were looking for women who were on the stroll. We were strolling. We were looking to meet women who were on the stroll, and we had we'd hand them a flyer, inviting them, come on over to church and get a cup of coffee, get warm up. It's cold out here. Get something to eat. Sit down and have a normal conversation with people. And women took us up on that. They were grateful to get out of the cold, eat a little something, talk about stuff with people. Just normal human interactions. They were so desperate for that. It was a start. And we got to meet some other people, some other nonprofits that were working on this, thinking the same way, saying, how can we meet them where they're at and not leave them where they're at? And saw some real success stories. We weren't able to, at this program long enough to really see a whole lot, but we could see, wow, there's potential. Nobody wants to stay in that life. So meet them in that life, but work with them to show them you're worth something. There's people who love you. We can make this. We can make this work. Come on, stick with us.
Yeah, that person-centered approach again, seeing the person, and not just what they're doing, but seeing the person who's doing this. And and that's again, you're thinking in terms of. I think that's a really neat idea in the sense of harm reduction. Even it's like, what do you need, right? Where I see something and I assume this is what you need, but maybe that's not what you need.
Yeah.
You need, what's going to be most helpful, and which can be challenging, of course. If like I said last time, or maybe I didn't, but I know I've said a number of times recently, it's like if you ask this person what they really need, and they say, "Well, I need some money for drugs." What do you do?
What do you do?
Right? And that's challenging. So we ask the question. Obviously, we have to be kind of thinking ahead of how do I respond? With what they do ask, and of course, in some cases, in some situations, that is absolutely what they need. Yeah. They have to have those drugs at this point in time because they are, chemically dependent on it. The body is dependent on it, and they can't just walk away from it. As much as they would love to just maybe walk away from it, they know they physically can't. So what kind of treatment can they get? What kind of detox can they get? What kind of help? And that becomes I think that's a challenging thing in the whole our community situation of, again, how do we actually really help someone? And because that's, again, I don't remember from 2 weeks ago, but with the medically assisted treatment program at the county facility, where somebody comes in and they're going to detox, they get approached and it's like, we can put you in a program that's going to help you with this. It'll help them through the detox, but they're also going to help them have something on board to keep them from having the cravings, and have some opioid blockers and things going forward, some counseling that's going to go forward, so that again, that most dangerous point in time when you've detoxed and then you come back out and use, it's a very dangerous time. And so but it's really kind of, again, what do you need? Where do you want to go with this? Not everyone's going to, I don't think everyone's going to take them up on it, but there's an awful lot that are. There have been people who have actually asked, please put me in there so I can do this, so I can get on that program and move in that direction. So, that's, again, one of those challenging areas in the concepts of recovery. Do we see recovery as all or nothing? Or do we see progression? You've gone from this chaotic use to, dependence, from dependence to, heavy use to, moving in that direction. And some people will get to abstinence. Some people never do. But they've maybe, gotten control of the situation where they're not totally out of control and in very dangerous places.
Mm-hmm.
One of the thoughts I had this week as I was thinking about this coming up, and I kind of anticipating maybe some of the objections that you heard, or some of those reactions you get when you start talking about harm reduction in the area of drugs, is the fact that we have such a visceral negative reaction to drug use. And so I thought, well, let's think in terms of this of alcohol use.
Mm-hmm.
And think in terms, because we don't have quite the same reaction when somebody's drinking, not quite as negatively. It doesn't seem to have quite the same stigma. I just think in terms of if I was going out to the bar with my friend, and we get there, and he just starts pounding drinks, double time of what I'm doing, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm any kind of friend, my mind's going to start going to, okay, this is different. He's behaving differently. We got to figure out something here. What kind of strategies might I employ to slow him down, to just redirect him? Maybe even tell him, and in some situations, be like just asking the bartender, when the mug is empty, don't grab it right away and fill it. Just let it sit there for a little bit, because they do that.
Mm-hmm.
I put that mug on the bar. It's almost immediately, if that bartender's on his game, he grabs it, starts filling it, because that's how you sell more.
Sure.
But if my friend's getting out of control, you have the bartender slow down, maybe, if you can do that. Mm-hmm. Or you again say, hey, why don't we get something to eat? Mm-hmm. Or we start thinking harm reduction, and I'm going to stay with this person, mm-hmm. To make sure they get home safe.
Okay.
Right. And I thought even in terms of, okay, so I've got this friend, he wants to go out drinking, and I know he's going to drink too much. Do I just say, nope, I'm not going? Well, what's he going to do? He's probably still going to go.
Someone else to go with.
Yeah, or he's going to go on his own. So I say, okay, I'll go with you, because then I can start to try to reduce the harm, that's taking place there, in different ways. And, that's kind of the little bit of thought process that I have when it comes to, this drug use. Is if your friend is doing something that's harming them, wouldn't you do anything to try to reduce, and keep them safe in some way? And what does that include? And sometimes it is just some of the stuff I was reading just tonight again. It was like some of those very same things. It's like, slow things down, make sure you're taking turns, getting a hit, slow it down, take a hit, at a different period of time. And then, drink some water, offer some water to somebody, and, because sometimes you're with somebody, you're both using, but you're not in quite a chaotic use as the other person is. And so you kind of just, the sick helping the sick, right? Or the sinner helping the sinner, of saying, I see where they're at, and when we can work, we'll keep each other safe. A lot of drug addicts and a lot of drug users do that. I mean, they're carrying Narcan, so if my buddy overdoses, I'm there for him.
Good thing.
And if I do, he's there for me. Buddy system. It's kind of strange sounding from in some respects, but it's the exact. To me, it's the exact. A lot of the same things we do around our alcohol use. And when we see somebody drinking alcohol, we don't think of them as a problem drinker right away. We don't think of them as being sick. We don't think of them as being an elkie right away. But we notice they seem to be using a bit more than maybe they should. And and that's when we start to think about, how do we slow this down? How do we change this situation? And if we could, I think people in the life that are using drugs I think they think somewhat like that. At least that's what I seem to be getting from some conversations I've had. But when you're on the outside looking in, it's really hard to think that way. You just think you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
You don't want to stop them. Yeah. And so this is I think, as in any recovery work, if you're not in the midst of it, it's a little bit harder to always, fully engage and go, because I haven't been there, done that. It's harder, but we can be allies. We can be people that are there to help and support.
Okay. I in getting to know people who have a whole lot more experience with addiction than I do because they're recovering addicts. It's always been enlightening for me to see what are their approaches with people who are still actively using, actively harming themselves with their chemical. Uh, I for a while I tried to have a strict all or nothing rule at my church that when people came in for our Friday night group, if you were under the influence in any way, shape, or form, just come back another day. And my recovering alcoholic friends were just so much more willing to cut them some slack. We'll sometimes they just sit and babysit a guy, so he's not getting out of control, and just try to work with him where he's at. So, I'm so glad to have your perspective. One guy, one of my friends, Charlie, uh, who he is a recovering alcoholic, and I mean, I bring that up because it comes into play later. There's a man living in a shack, near somewhere near where he lived, and it was getting to be about this time of year. It was November. We're starting to get some freezing nights. This guy he was falling asleep drunk in his shack every night, and Charlie knew this guy's going to die out there. What do I do? He wasn't thinking so much about this guy's got to quit drinking. He's like, this guy's got to get into something place warm. So I got a call from Charlie one Saturday afternoon. He was desperate. He said, I've got Mike in my van. I'm driving him around. I'm trying to get help, and I can't find him any help. What can you tell me?" And it's like, "Jeez, the poor Charlie. He so much wanted to save this guy's life that he went and bought him a 32 ouncer of malt liquor. This is Charlie's an alcoholic. He just and buying booze for somebody. He said, "Well, it was to get him into my van," and which makes him sound like a really creepy guy, doesn't it? And he drove Mike around to some various places trying to get him somewhere. I gave him a number of some people I thought might be able to help, but they, unless Mike was willing, there was nothing they could do. And Charlie didn't want to see the guy die. He got him to go with him to a police station. I don't know how he. Yeah, and somebody in the police station caught on to Charlie's desperation. He says to Mike, "Take your shoes off, take your socks off," and he complied. And he says, "Frostbite, medical emergency, get him out of here." And just like that, they whisked him off, and Mike's life was saved for at least another night. Wasn't going back to sleep in the freezing cold. That was so. Buying booze for a guy who's out of control alcoholic. Well, Charlie did it and probably saved the guy's life.
And what you said, he saved him for that night.
For that night,
We don't know the future, but sometimes we think it's like, well, but long term, what? It's like, no, right now he's alive.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's a fantastic story that. Yeah, you probably didn't even think in terms of harm reduction when you hear that story.
Right.
Exactly. That's exactly what's going on there, isn't it? I don't want him to die. It's better he's drunk right now and in my van than in his shack dying.
Yeah.
Wow, that is neat. That is really cool.
Well, guys, we've had some good conversation here, but this might be a good place for us to kind of wrap it up.
Okay.
Phil, it's your turn to pray out.
It's my turn to pray?
Yeah.
We've got turns now.
And Ruth is keeping track. Okay.
Sorry, Diamond, no more voting.
All right. Lord God, you are so patient with us. Instead of just focusing on this behavior's got to go, it's like, no, my son has to stay. My child has to stay. Thank you for going to all the lengths you go to putting up with so much. And boy, in the end, it's just like what Paul said. You guys, you make me glad. We can put a smile on your face, and I'm so glad about that, God. I like to think that as time goes on, I'm making you smile more and more. Help me with that, Lord God. Help me to be your way of reaching out to people too. We're running into so many people we just have no patience for. Their behaviors. It's just, this is messing up our program. This is messing up our congregation. This is messing up my community. And it truly is. Help us to see the behaviors, acknowledge them, and see the person, and love the person, and see them as somebody you love with all your heart. And what can we do? What do they need? How can we meet them where they're at and not leave them where they're at? You did that for us. We're going to do it for others. Help us as individuals. Help our congregations. Praying for this in your name, Jesus, our Savior. Amen.
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 Thanks,
All right.
Phil, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight.
All right.
All right.